I was 40 when my suspicions began. My wife, Rachel, was 43. We'd been married for 10 years and together for 13. Rachel worked at a prestigious firm, and her boss, Derek, was known to be a charming man with a reputation for getting too close to his female employees. I had met him a few times at company events, and something about his overly friendly demeanor always rubbed me the wrong way. Rachel had been acting strangely for the past few months. She spent more time at the office, took longer to get ready in the mornings, and seemed distant at home. Our once lively conversations turned into brief exchanges, and our intimacy had all but disappeared. I chalked it up to the pressures of her job at first, but then, small things began to gnaw at me. One evening, Rachel told me she had to stay late at work to finish a project. It was the third time that week. I decided to surprise her with dinner, thinking it might relieve some of her stress. When I arrived at her office, it was empty, and the lights were off. I called her, and she answered on the first ring, her voice breathless. She claimed she was at a nearby cafe having a quick coffee before heading back to work. The next day, she seemed flustered when I mentioned my surprise visit. She brushed it off, saying she must have missed me by minutes, and that she indeed had gone back to work. Her explanation seemed plausible, but a seed of doubt had been planted in my mind. As days turned into weeks, I noticed more signs. Rachel started dressing up more than usual, even on days she claimed to be working from home. Her phone, once left casually around the house, was now always within her reach, and she took it with her everywhere. I couldn't help but feel that she was hiding something. One night, while she was in the shower, I couldn't resist the urge to check her phone. It was locked, a new development, and the password wasn't one I knew. My heart sank. Rachel had always been open with her phone, and this sudden change felt like a wall being built between us. I didn't confront her immediately, not wanting to seem paranoid without concrete evidence, but the suspicion lingered. The turning point came when I overheard a conversation she was having on the phone. She was in the living room, and I was in the kitchen. Her voice was soft, almost tender, and she was laughing in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. I strained to hear, catching bits and pieces. "Yes, Derek, I'll be there soon." "No, Mike doesn't suspect anything." My blood ran cold. Derek, her boss, the man I had always been wary of. My mind raced with scenarios, each one more painful than the last. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Determined to uncover the truth, I started paying closer attention to Rachel's behavior and looking for any signs of infidelity. It wasn't long before I noticed more inconsistencies. Her stories didn't always add up, and she seemed to be putting more effort into her appearance than usual. I decided I needed concrete evidence before confronting her. One evening, I installed a small GPS tracker in her car while she was in the shower. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I was invading her privacy, but my need for answers outweighed my reservations. Over the next few days, I monitored her movements, noting her frequent visits to a particular address that wasn't on her usual route to work or home. The address belonged to a luxury apartment complex in a part of town where Derek lived. My heart sank every time I saw her car parked there. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I still hoped I was mistaken. I needed more evidence. One night, Rachel told me she had a late meeting at the office. I pretended to be supportive, hiding my turmoil, and encouraged her to go. As soon as she left, I followed her. Sure enough, she drove straight to the apartment complex. I parked a safe distance away and watched as she entered the building, greeting the doorman like she was a regular visitor. I waited for what felt like an eternity before deciding to approach the building. I needed to see her with my own eyes, to confirm my worst fears. I slipped inside the lobby when a resident exited, and I took the elevator to the floor I had seen Rachel disappear onto. My hands were trembling, and my heart pounded in my chest. As I walked down the hallway, I heard voices coming from one of the apartments. I recognized Rachel's laugh, a sound that used to bring me joy but now filled me with dread. I stood outside the door, straining to hear the conversation inside. "Derek, this is too risky. What if Mike finds out?" Rachel's voice was filled with anxiety. "Relax, Rachel. He has no idea. Besides, we deserve to be happy," Derek replied smoothly. My mind went blank. There was no longer any doubt. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. The woman I had loved and trusted for so many years was betraying me with my boss. The pain was almost unbearable, but I knew I had to keep it together if I wanted to confront her properly. I left the building, my emotions in turmoil. I needed a plan. I couldn't just burst in and confront them without thinking it through. I decided to gather more evidence to make sure I had an airtight case. Over the next few days, I took photos of Rachel's car at the apartment complex, recorded their conversations when I could, and saved any suspicious messages I found on her phone when she wasn't looking. Finally, I had enough proof. There was no denying what was happening. The time had come to confront Rachel and Derek and face the painful truth head-on. With the evidence in hand, I prepared for what would be the hardest conversation of my life. I wanted to confront Rachel in a way that would leave no room for excuses or denials. I decided to wait until she returned from one of her late meetings. It was a Friday night when the opportunity presented itself. Rachel came home looking flustered but trying to appear nonchalant. I was sitting in the living room, the lights dimmed, and the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. She greeted me with a strained smile, clearly sensing something was off. "Mike, why are you sitting in the dark?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said, my tone calm but firm. "Sit down." She hesitated, then sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes avoiding mine. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know about you and Derek," I said, watching her reaction closely. Her face went pale, and her eyes widened in shock. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to sound incredulous. "Don't lie to me, Rachel. I've seen the messages. I followed you to his apartment. I have pictures and recordings." I laid out the evidence on the coffee table in front of her. She stared at the damning proof, her hands trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "Mike, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice cold and controlled. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "About 6 months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why, Rachel? Why would you do this to us?" My anger was simmering just beneath the surface, held back by sheer willpower. "I don't know," she cried. "It just happened. Derek was there for me when I felt alone and stressed, but it was a mistake. I realize that now." I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. "A mistake? You call 6 months of betrayal a mistake? You've destroyed our marriage, Rachel." She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Please, Mike, let me make it right. I'll end it with Derek. We can go to counseling, anything. Just don't leave me." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. My decision was made. "It's too late for that, Rachel. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We're getting a divorce." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't afford to let my resolve waver. I needed to take action against Derek as well. He wasn't going to get away with ruining my life. The next day, I went to the office with a copy of the evidence. I marched into Derek's office and threw the folder on his desk. "You might want to start looking for a new job," I said coldly. He looked through the documents, his face turning ashen. "Mike, I can explain." "Save it," I interrupted. "You slept with my wife. There's nothing more to say. I've sent a copy of this to HR. I hope it was worth it." With that, I walked out of his office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The confrontation had been necessary, but it didn't erase the pain of betrayal. I had taken steps to reclaim my dignity, but the wounds were still fresh. In the weeks that followed, I focused on picking up the pieces of my life. Rachel moved out, and I began the process of healing. I leaned on friends and family for support, finding solace in their understanding and compassion. Counseling sessions helped me navigate the emotional turmoil, and gradually, I started to see a future beyond the betrayal. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and began to rediscover myself. One evening, while attending a friend's gathering, I met someone new. Her name was Emily, and there was an immediate connection between us. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope and excitement about the future. As the months turned into a year, Emily and I grew closer. She was kind, understanding, and patient, allowing me the space to heal while offering unwavering support. Our relationship blossomed naturally, built on trust and mutual respect. Looking back on the ordeal with Rachel and Derek, I realized how far I had come. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been a catalyst for change and growth. I had learned to prioritize my own well-being and to value the importance of honesty and trust in a relationship. With Emily by my side and a renewed sense of self, I felt ready to embrace the future. The pain of the past had not been forgotten, but it no longer defined me. I had found strength in my vulnerability and had emerged from the darkness with a new perspective on life and love. As I stood on the threshold of a new beginning, I felt a sense of peace and gratitude. The journey had been arduous, but it had led me to a place of healing and hope. And in that moment, I knew that I was ready to start a new chapter, leaving the past behind and looking forward to a brighter, happier future.